Hello, and welcome to Shelf Life from the Virginia Festival of the Book, featuring live-streamed author events every Thursday. I'm Sarah Lawson, Associate Director of the Virginia Center for the Book, a program of Virginia Humanities. Thanks for joining us. A couple notes before I hand the program over to our speakers. Please share your questions using the Q&A tab on Zoom. Also, this event has optional closed captioning, which you can turn on and customize at any time using the Closed Captions tab at the bottom of your window. If you haven't already read today's books, we hope you will. For details about how to buy them from a local bookseller or check out copies from your library, visit vabook.org, where you can also explore the Shelf Life schedule and watch past events. While you're there, please consider making a donation to support the festival's ongoing work at vabook.org/give. Also, thank you to our community partner for this event, the Creative Writing Program at UVA. Now, I'm pleased to introduce Raisa Tolchinsky, who will introduce our speakers. Raisa is a poet and teacher who has lived and worked in Chicago, New York, Italy, and Iceland, and is trained as an amateur boxer. She is currently a Poe Faulkner Fellow in Poetry at the University of Virginia, working on her first manuscript. Thank you for joining us today, Raisa. Take it away.
Thank you so much, Sarah. And it's a joy to be here and to be introducing these poets. We will begin with Sandra Beasley. Sandra Beasley is the author of 4 poetry collections: Made to Explode, Count the Waves, I Was the Jukebox, and Theories of Falling, as well as Don't Kill the Birthday Girl, Tales from an Allergic Life, a disability memoir and cultural history of food allergies. The recipient of a fellowship from the National Endowment for the Arts, she lives in Washington, D.C. Ada Limon says of this collection, a rare and vibrant exploration of whiteness and complicity when it comes to America's history and traditions. Made to Explode is a courageous interrogation of self, culture, and how we are made. Both unflinching and tender, Beasley's smart and radiant poems glow with a historian's exactitude and a poet's lyrical heart. Please welcome Sandra Beasley.
Hi, everyone. Yes, I come to you from downtown DC, so apologies in advance for any helicopters or other passing traffic. I'm going to read a few poems to get us started from Made to Explode. And I thought, since this broadcast will correspond with many folks' lunchtime, that I would stick to one of the main themes of Made to Explode, which is poems about food, engaging food traditions. This in part dovetailed with the work I did editing Vinegar and Char, verse from the Southern Foodways Alliance. Although you very quickly realize when you're editing and looking at other people's poems about food, 1, that you have poems of your own you need to write, and 2, that you can't write about food in a vacuum. To write about food is to write about family, it's to write about class and money, it's to write about race and history, it's to write about the tactile interaction of generations. So I'm going to start by reading the first poem in the book, which offers some very, very important technical, factual information about the origin of Ore-Ida tater tots, which, if you have not had, I give you permission to leave the reading right now and seek tater tots. But hopefully you've had them, so maybe you're having them right now. This is called Heirloom, and it really does tell the story about how we ended up with this strange, fabulous fried potato food product. Lo, 12 children born to a woman named Thankful in Nampa, by the border between Oregon and Idaho, or as it will be remembered, or Ida. Lo, 2 of her sons drive to Miami, not knowing if their plan will work. Lo, what were once waste scraps fed to the cows, now repackaged, the fry shavings sliced, spiced, and oiled. Lo, a chef at the Fontainebleau takes the bribe. Lo, tater tots are dished onto the tables of the 1954 National Potato Convention and soon enshrined in the freezers of America. 3 decades later, the golden age of my childhood is a foil-lined tray plattered with Ore-Ida product, maybe salt, maybe nothing but hot anticipation of my fingertips. Lo, my mother is a great cook. And lo, my grandmother is a terrible one. But on tinfoil planes, they are equal. I need you to understand why my father will never enjoy an heirloom tomato, glistening, layered in basil. Put away your brandy wines, your Cherokee purples, your green zebras. Lo, as with spinach, as with olives, he tastes only the claustrophobia his mother unleashed from cans to feed 4 children on a budget. We talk little of this. Lo, what is cooked to mush, lo, what is peppered to ash, lo, the flavor rendered as morning chore, that this too is a form of love. So as I said, even though a number of the poems in this book are centered on food, that invariably intersects with history. So I'll read a poem about the ways that food was handled by the history of the US space program, which gave me the wonderful opportunity not only to research, but to use a title I've always dreamed of using, which is Pigs in Space, or as I hear it in my head, Pigs in Space. Landing at the Sea of Tranquility, the clock calls for breakfast. 8 squares of bacon coated in gelatin, dehydrated peaches, apricot cereal cubes. No salt on the loose, no spice. 15 cups of coffee per astronaut. All this fine-tuned in the 8 years since Gemini pilot John Young's pocket revealed a corned beef sandwich, courtesy Wolfie's of Cocoa Beach, which he offered to Gus Grissom as the crumbs broke away and floated toward the fickle innards of the ship. Now everything is bound into bar or pouch, cocktail shrimp, hand-selected to squeeze one by one through the tubing. Inventing the space taco will take another 2 decades. Sturdy tortillas will be fortified for shelf life, glued together by creamed onions. In 2008, Korean scientists will perfect how to prepare kimchi without the lactic bacterial fizz that might, given cosmic rays, just happen to mutate. But we are not there yet. And for days, the Apollo 11 menu has asked them to imagine one taste as beef, another as chicken, to discern first tuna, then salmon. As they ready to step outside the lunar module, Buzz Aldrin unscrews a tiny vial drawn from his private pouch, and the wine drapes at 1/6 gravity. His fingertips grip a tiny chalice, while the other hand places a wafer on his tongue. During all this, NASA cuts the feed. Soon they'll return to regularly scheduled acts of faith, releasing hydrogen and oxygen to mix inside the fuel cell. From that, a gathering of water, and from that, a chowder of corn. There's a little bit of a family tie with that last poem. My grandfather served as a flight physician, kind of coming from the Navy, and he worked with a number of the astronauts in the early missions, including John Glenn. So since I, in an indirect way, read a poem that was thinking about my grandfather, I'll read a poem thinking about my grandmother. This is a poem called Card Table. A practical gift for moving to the city. Good cherry squared around black vinyl, 4 long legs that fold within itself as a greyhound does, disappearing into a nap. Just big enough for a bridge match, if I'd ever had 4 people willing to kiss knees, just big enough to let me call a corner of that S Street studio my breakfast nook, stacked with a week's worth of newspapers while I ate cereal cross-legged on my futon. Just big enough to pull out every few years and complain how small the table was, too crowded as a desk, too low for my chairs. In January, we stared at the strange space wedged between 2 kitchen doorways. Might as well try the card table. We stacked onions there, then potatoes, then tomatoes and peaches, and it became the chopping table, stirring table, serving table. Now, the first morning she is gone, I see a swipe in the vinyl where a hot dish burned through and realize I forgot to ask for anything. A ring, her sheet music. So what I have is this reminder that she too was once a girl in a city and that she knew I'd always need a table. I'll finish by reading one more poem. I've read 3 poems that have intersect with food in some ways, but anybody who knows me, who knows my memoir, knows I have food allergies. I have a ton of things that I cannot eat. And one of the things that this book does in its interrogation of a number of subjects is think about food allergies coming from the angle of some misguided attempts to guide me towards what people thought I would find interesting over the years, which was often a form of victimization, kind of attack stories involving food allergies. And I find myself increasingly thinking about the ways that the problem is not our allergies themselves, but the ways that the people around us interact with them and kind of romanticize them towards their own ends. Death by chocolate. A man wants my take on his novel, where a wife dies with a peanut in her mouth after we've met her husband, in the act with his secretary, in the passenger seat of a late life convertible. A man wants my take on his novel, where the husband's marital issues are solved by her anaphylactic collapse after he serves her takeout spiked with a cashew. And for another 300 pages, he wonders, was it an accident or did I know? Somewhere out there, a man is writing a novel about a chef with a taste for adding shrimp paste to curry and his unsuspecting shellfish allergic wife, and I will be asked for my take on it. I have been offered dozens of takes on my own death. Suggestions abound. Death by ice cream, death by cake, death by cucumber, though that would take a while, perhaps gazpacho as a shortcut. Death by mango, death by Spanish omelet, death by dairy. An abstraction sexy to someone who has never side-eyed cream brought out slopping toward the coffee, who has never felt histamine's palm at her throat, who says to me, cheese makes life worth living. These wives, I get you, women who did not grow up aspiring to be a plot device. We almost die a lot, or we die a lot, almost. We're over it. Our mouths have more to say. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Sandra. That was amazing. And you read one of my favorites, which is The Death by Chocolate. Thanks so much. Next, we have Nin Andrews. Nin, author of The Last Orgasm, has published poems in many literary journals and anthologies, including Plowshares, Agony, the Paris Review, and 4 editions of Best American Poetry. She's the author of 7 chapbooks and 7 full-length poetry collections. Her collection, Why God is a Woman, won the Ohioana Award. Claire Bateman says, like her topic, Nin Andrews' virtuosic collection is as equivocal as it is evanescent, with unpredictable gaps and surges. No poem orgasm stands alone. The collection is richly and hilariously associational, mythically postmodern, a twinkling synaptic map of contemporary and historic poetic correlations. Please welcome Nin Andrews.
Ah. Oh, there you go. Sorry, I was having trouble getting the video on. Thanks so much, Raisa, for that wonderful introduction. And also thanks to Jane Kulo and Sarah Lawson and everybody who works on this wonderful festival. It is such an honor to be here and to be reading with these fabulous poets. So I'm going to be reading from my latest book, as Raisa said, The Last Orgasm, which was published by Treskin Press. And I know you're wondering why The Last Orgasm. And my short answer is all good things must end. And my longer answer is that, as some of you may know, my first book was the Book of Orgasms, and that's a title that's very hard to live down. So every time I've read since then, people have requested an orgasm poem. So I thought I would put an end once and for all to such requests. The dirty orgasm. I know what you think. I'm the orgasm poet. I have nothing else to write about. I should stop, or we should, the orgasm and I, now. You've had enough of our antics, our poetry, our socially unacceptable performances. Even the word orgasm should be banned. It's dirty, unkempt, and leaves tracks on the floor and in the mind. I agree. I'm sick of it too, but what can I do? I who have kept an orgasm like a genie for so long. I've even sought medical advice, but the doctor insists the orgasm is all in my mind. He doesn't know the orgasm can hide in my favorite coffee mug, tucked behind the dishes where no one else will find it, and at the bottom of a laundry basket, folded and refolded like an origami bird. You need only stop obsessing, the doctor insists, and the orgasm will vanish forever. So I have been thinking about not thinking about the orgasm, but I have my fears. If the orgasm is all in my mind, what if my thoughts leave first? If I have to pick between an orgasm and a brain, which would it be? What if one is part of the other, like the sugar in my coffee or the milk in my cappuccino after the froth is gone? And what am I to make of that cream curdled at the bottom of my unwashed cup? So I've always been fascinated by linguistics, especially the verb to be, and how one talks about the question of to be or not to be in another language. And so this is a question that the orgasm addresses about the Spanish language. One day, the orgasm decides to move to Spain, to leave this country behind and reinvent herself in another language and landscape. But she can't figure out how to be an orgasm in Spanish. Her travel guide speaks only of el orgasmo. Do the Spanish not know la orgasma? And why not? After all, cats are both el gato and la gata, and they even have little gatitos. So shouldn't orgasms come in both genders and have little orgasmitos? Reading a little further, she wonders if an orgasm is simply there in Spain, as in I la orgasma, no verb necessary. She likes the idea, the simplicity, that she, the orgasm, could merely exist. She pictures a curtain opening to applause as she steps into the spotlight and takes a bow. Her red hair sweeps the floor. But then she wonders, how did she get there? Was she had by another as in English? Tuvo una orgasma? She's tired of being had. Why can't she simply be? But what form of to be would she be? Ser or estar? She thinks ser. She tries it out as soon as she arrives in the airport in Madrid. Hola, she announces. Yo soy la orgasma. The people turn their backs on her. Some even break into a run, their suitcase wheels squealing behind them. How lonely she feels then. Eavesdropping on passersby, she hears one say, estoy muerto. In speaking of death, she realizes, one uses the verb estar. Death, it turns out, is an ongoing condition in Spain. So if death is ongoing, then surely the orgasm is too, both of them being the all too familiar, uninvited guests in the backs of people's minds. Just thinking of this, the orgasm grows sad. Estoy si triste, she sighs. How lovely that sounds. Triste, like a tree of stars. So this is my one political poem in the book. It's called Orgasm. My husband was in bed reading the news. When I bent to kiss him, he said, "Lie down, why don't you?" And I did. "You're still reading the news," I said. "Yes," he said, and absently patted my arm. "What's happening?" I asked. "Donald Trump just won the election," he said. That's when I had to leave. I don't care for Donald Trump. Neither does my husband. I felt so lonesome then, so bereft. I walked to the desk and began to type. Words undulated in slow waves through my mind. They did not tell the truth. They said, I live by the ocean in a city of dust and crows. I'm the most beautiful redhead alive. Today, wearing a green satin blouse, I stretch out beneath the palm trees to warm my nut brown thighs. I stopped writing. Outside, it was beginning to rain. I sipped weak coffee and gave the dog a biscuit. I called the poem Orgasm, even if there was not a single orgasm in that dusty seaside town. Black dress on a white carpet after Cesar Vallejo. You will leave me in Toledo on a snowy day in winter, a day I already remember. You will leave me in Toledo. I already see you stepping outside in your skimpy black dress, your tall boots. The wind lifts your hair. You don't look up or back. You are but an exclamation mark on a white page on a Sunday in winter in Toledo, Ohio. I know this because today is Sunday. The church bells are ringing. The faithful in their fur coats and hats, their hands buried deep in their pockets, are on their way to worship, even as I write these lines. And I feel not you, but the absence of you, like a pearly winter glow. Even as I make love to you, even as I worship you, your lips, your thighs, your clavicle and hip bones and long, slender toes, even as you fall asleep beside me, even as you call out my name in a dream, as your black dress sways on the wicker chair above the white carpet, and I see you as a dream in a black dress, an ache in my skin and deep in my bones, and suddenly I know you are leaving. And I watch you leave. I have never felt so alone, so lost. I want to wake you. I want to tell you love will tie us in knots. Love will beat us with sticks. Love will say he did nothing to us. You know how love is, so full of lies. But it will be too late. It already is. You are already leaving me, stepping outside into the snow, with no one but the sky as your witness, the winter birds, the trees, the wind. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, Nin. It was beautiful. I always feel like I need to take a deep breath after each of these readings before we move on. Next, we have Katherine E. Young. Katherine is the author of Women Drinking Absinthe and Day of the Border Guards and the editor of Written in Arlington. Young's translations of contemporary Russian language poetry and prose have won international awards. Several translations have been made into short films. In 2016, Young was selected as the inaugural Poet Laureate of Arlington County. Richard Peabody says of Women Drinking Absinthe that it is an emotional rescue operation, survival guide, and call to arms. How do you navigate the minefields of the heart, avoid the collateral damage of relationships? Katherine E. Young finds keys in nature, in opera, in seasoning, in Civil War battlefields, phantom limbs, shadows, and invisible flowers. Please welcome Katherine E. Young.
Thanks so much, Raisa. Thanks to everyone at the Virginia Festival of the Book, to the wonderful people that I'm reading with today, wonderful poets, and thank you everyone who's watching. So the book, Woman Drinking Absinthe, is interested in the terrible, unforgivable, and utterly human things that people do to one another. And my reading today is going to start in the middle of the book, but we've already encountered a visitor from Mars, a calculus problem, and a mysterious talking bear. So although it's a bit early in the day, now we're going to go on a pub crawl. Leaving home, as in moving out. Leaving home, my husband's house, I lose myself, baffled by streets bearing names I no longer know, their curves and contours couched in shadow, each Eden, El Dorado, Elysium, a sign signaling simply exit. Slipping beneath the city's skin, I discover bluegrass, blues, jazz bars, burr of scotch, whiskey with soda. I meet a man, many men, feel fingers flens my face, smell the way flesh melts into midnight in temporary rooms. Recently, I dreamed of home, my husband's back partitioning the bed, unbreached, unbreachable. Here, when it rains, the skylight weeps, the sink gnaws its own enamel. Near the window, an amaryllis arrays itself anxiously. So much need, my husband once said in disbelief. So much needless grief. The next poem comes from the fairy tale The Fisherman and His Wife, in which the fisherman keeps catching an enchanted fish, and the fish manages to stay alive by granting the fisherman's increasingly unreasonable wishes. The golden fish. Some say I'm a fish, some a mermaid. The women say I'm something worse. What's important? I enthrall the fishermen, arrest their knives at the point of entry. Chinese, English, Russian, all the common tongues. It isn't hard to learn the words to ask these men, what's your desire? Each thinks I speak to him alone. Each says the same thing. Peace at home. The wife's forgotten how much he loves her. What she wants is stuff. Funny, these men just want to fish. Once I give him what he wants, the clever wife gets what she wants. Granite counters, induction burners. She's Lady Tsarina, Queen of Hearts. Does she ever deign to thank me? Ever imagine her life with fins? After a while, a squall blows up. He's sorry, the man tells me. His wife's gone crazy. She wants to be God. Could I please, just one last time? Some things don't even require enchantment. Go home now, I sigh. I always sigh. She's waiting by the door once more. He's gone, just like that. They never come back. The next poem is about the Edouard Manet painting Bar at the Folies Bergères. It is believed that Manet used oranges in some of his paintings to suggest prostitution. And it is known that the actual barmaid from the Folies Bergères posed for Manet's painting. Bar at the Folies Bergères. It starts with the scent of lavender as she buttons clean pantaloons, laces up stays, smooths her bodice and shakes out the frills, ties the black ribbon about her neck. Her costume smells, as they all do, mingled sweat and makeup, the fabric itself, splashed perhaps with a licorice twist of absinthe. Then come powder and rouge, the small earrings, a pink and white corsage already starting to droop. Her props are placed on view. Beer bottles, champagne, a vase containing 2 pale roses, cut glass bowl of oranges that may or may not indicate a certain kind of availability. Leaning against the marble bar, she doesn't look at you. Why should she look at you? Can you give her what she needs, or even cab fare home? Posing, perhaps, or perhaps beyond posing, her face bleak, artificially rosy amid the moon-pale globes and crystals shimmering in the ersatz heaven of the cabaret. Perhaps a man inspects her in the glass. Perhaps he's looking past. Neither of them seems to see the woman on the trapeze, feet squeezed into ankle boots of lizard green. Later, she observes his red gold lashes, watches his still young face slacken in sleep, breathes in his scent of cigars, cheap brandy, scent that clings to her fingers like orange oil as she works her nails beneath the skin, methodically stripping the pith to find whatever's left of the fruit's sweet flesh. The title poem of the book, Woman Drinking Absinthe, begins with an epigraph by W.B. Yeats. A living man is blind and drinks his drop. Woman drinking absinthe. Tonight, you're speaking of your wife, the bride you brought across the sea. She tends your sons, pickles fish and ginger on weekends, teaches you the custom of her father, who kept a woman in the village. The waitress knows us as a pair. We share a glass, finish one another's sentences. But what's my role in this miserable tableau? Girlfriend, whore, pursing my lips in the brass cladding of the bar. I've pitched into your blind man's ditch. Toulouse-Lautrec might have cartooned the blousy hair, the cloudy gaze of the woman at this table coaxing one last drop from La Fée Verte, one last delusion from the muse. You shrug, obligingly peel back flaps, cloth, skin, connective tissue, rib, so framed, your heart glistens like the frog's, ghastly hallucination. I gaze at its pulsing, nacreous sac, so like my own. Tell myself, this must be love. Already I've succumbed to viridescent dreams, numbed myself to fingers fumbling at bra straps, clasps, the cup and suction of your mouth, the wheels it leaves, louche of bitter wormwood, of aniseed. The next poem is Bluebeard. Everybody knows the story of Bluebeard, right? He is the ogre who murders his wives and keeps their corpses in a room, which is locked with an enchanted key that he uses to tempt his next victim. Bluebeard. His beard was blue, but not so very blue. So when he handed me his keys and warned me not to try the littlest one, I fingered the scrolls that curled along its bow, its tiny nape and teeth, and hung it from a silk ribbon above my heart. I tidied the rooms while he was gone, oiling the other locks, their keys. So what if I tripped over objects in the gloom, sent them spinning toward dim corners? Of course they weren't bones. As for the iron-sweet scent of blood in the air, it must have been my own. Besides, a woman needn't fear blood or bones, touchstones she's learned to reckon by. How else could she simmer stock from her body's blossom, coax fresh new growth from the very marrow of life? At last he returned, roaring through the door, tearing cloth and wire to free the key dangling between my breasts, sniff it suspiciously. Oddly arousing, his pouting, disappointed mouth. Postcards from the floating world. 1. I cry out. His words fall, petals on the ocean, blossoms in a storm. 2. I cry out. His eyes flicker, luckless, entangled in the streetlight's net. 3, I cry out. His lips fold up like birds' broken wings tensed against his mouth. 4, I cry out. His hands claw, fierce, wild, deeper than pain, cradling my face. Soul food. That first time, when you hit me, I marveled at the crack your hand made as it struck flat against my face. I should have known right then we were headed straight for this soul food joint where I'm picking at turnip greens, sweet potato pie, as you plead with me to take my inconvenient heart and just go away. You say it's all my fault. I ask too much, love too deep. Don't make me do it again, you say. I know you mean it. Like you mean this next thing. When we've split the last of the cornbread, made our exit past the catfish gazing lugubrious in his tank, when we're standing in the parking lot, your arms around me, your hand, same hand, traces the bone of my cheek, softly, longingly, as if I'd never been there, as if you'd never leave. So despite what you've heard today, this book doesn't just dwell in madness and grief. And I'm going to close now with a found poem of healing. It's a 300-year-old recipe that first appeared in the Philosophical Transactions of the Royal Society, which was published in London about 1690. It's a recipe to cure mad dogs or men or beasts bitten by mad dogs. Agrimony roots, primrose roots, dragon roots, single peony roots, the leaves of box, of each a handful, the star of the earth, 2 handfuls, the black of crab's claws prepared, Venice treacle, of each 1 ounce. All these to be beaten and bruised together and boiled in a gallon of milk till the half be boiled away. Then put into a bottle, unstrained, and given 3 or 4 spoonfuls at a time to the dog or beast or man, 3 mornings together before new and full moon. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Catherine. That was wonderful. Thank you. Our final reader is Vijay Seshadri, the author of the poetry books Wild Kingdom, The Long Meadow, The Disappearances, 3 sections, and in 2020, That Was Now, This Is Then, as well as many essays, reviews, and memoir fragments. His work has been widely published and anthologized. 3 sections won the 2013 Pulitzer Prize in Poetry. Ilya Kaminsky says, Seshadri is a voice that speaks honestly without any patronizing, a voice that wants to see in each of us the free person, the truly free, free from time, space. This is the only way to speak in our time's moment or any moment. Please welcome Vijay.
Hi, thank you, Raisa, and thank you, Sarah and Jane, and the Virginia Festival of the Book, and all my fellow readers. It's great to be here. It's one of my favorite venues. This is the 3rd time I've participated over the years, and since time is running a little short, I'm just going to read 2 poems, so we can have a Q&A. And the first one is sort of a response to Nin's poem about the verb to be in Spanish. And this takes up the same theme. And it's called Soliloquy. It's a dramatic monologue, and its source should be obvious. Soliloquy. All the experts say I'm sane. Some even say I might acquire insight someday. Some even introduce me to their kids. What could be more reassuring than that? Also, when it comes to my body, I like it and I care for it. I read the latest research. My diet is 80-20 alkalinity to acidity. My body is a temple wherein my spirit, in which I also believe, like any other normal person, is sublimely housed. So why on a train platform just before the engine barrels in, do I feel a thrill rising from my groin to my solar plexus and imagine jumping? Why on a puddle hopper from one mid-sized Midwestern city to another, going from one sales meeting to another? And I not only like myself, I like my job. Our market share is growing. Business class is great. The leg room and the free drinks. Do I watch myself unbuckling my seatbelt, creeping down the aisle, wrenching counterclockwise the emergency exit's cold, recalcitrant shank, kicking open the door to the beautiful and spacious skies, and plunging 5 miles down, past the goshawks rising on their thermals, plunging to America and its billowing farms, with fields dotted here and there, with big lozenges of hay wrapped in white plastic, moist with the morning dew. Every time, the exquisite acceleration down the steeples of the air, 32 feet per second, the overheated mind ventilating at last, the ground coming up very fast, though not to hit the ground. No. What a piece of work that would turn out to be. Or to be slammed like a caddisfly against the train's bullet head, traumatizing the poor, pitiable engineer. A guy just like me, doing his job, and suddenly he finds himself face to face with horror. No, not that, never that, but simply for the moment before the last, the penultimate moment, and the moment inside the penultimate moment, and the moment inside that, and that, and that. I have heard it said, I have heard it is written, I have read of it, and I have understood by reason's light within me that the moment I am speaking of stretches across eternity and never moves on to become the next moment. And to be suspended inside it is to see our pinpoint presence among the stars reversed, and the stars themselves coalescing into a perfect orb small enough to hold in the palm of the hand, from the center of which being shall look into your eyes. Who wouldn't jump for a chance at that? Yesterday, in the General Mitchell International Airport, in the city of Milwaukee, in the state of Wisconsin, I was served an arresting fortune cookie at the Chinese restaurant there. It read, "Life cries out, be, O ancient sages of the Middle Kingdom." Of course. And this is the last poem in my book, and it's called To the Reader. And I'm closing with this one. To the Reader. I'm writing this so I can tell you that what you're thinking about me is exactly what I'm thinking about you. What you're reading is exactly what you're writing, by the light of a taper deep inside yourself, at your walnut secretary. These words are saying what those words say. And these and those are those and these, mine and yours, and have no meaning, only form. Talk about being one with others. We correspond one to one, and there is a grandeur in this. You'll understand that someday. Just now, though, you're stupefied at this spooky action at a distance. So would I be, and I am. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vijay, and thank you so much to all of our amazing readers today. And I'm so excited to be able to ask a few questions and then also ask some questions from the Q&A at the bottom of the screen. I think the first thing I was really thinking about was the word explode, thinking about Sandra's title. And then the silence that comes after explosion and that quiet that comes. Could you talk about what it means as a poet to trust the pause, the caesura, the silence after a final line? And I'm also curious what your relationship with silence is on or off the page. And whoever is ready to jump in, feel free to start us off.
I think that's such an interesting question to give equal weight to what happens after, right? And I think metaphorically, honestly, it makes me think of Nin's discussion of orgasms, but I guess that's a different conversation. I think that taking pause, I think any poet has had the experience of the silence that comes after not just the individual pause in a line, but on the level of completing a book. So I think a lot of us have thought about that way. Certainly the politics of the last 5 years, which is something that my book in some ways engages, has had me thinking a lot about the importance of being silent and listening rather than thinking that my own voice needs to fill the void, which I suppose I'll enact by ending my answer there.
I'll go. Because as you were asking the question, I was thinking back to my beginnings as a poet, and I knew a young poet. You know, when I was first getting interested in poetry, who said something to me. He was very much more advanced than I was, and was kind of a poetry star in the circles in which I lived at that time. And he said something about poetry. He said that it's, you know, what poetry is about is taking the noise out of the world and turning it into silence somehow, you know, so that all of these elements suddenly resonate in a silent dome that you create. And that, and I've always really, you know, people always come up with definitions of poetry, and most of them are not very satisfying, you know, but that's always one that I've kind of come back to and said, oh yeah, you know, that makes sense, a certain amount of sense. Yeah, it's a good question.
I don't think I really have an answer, but I do know that I often try to write fiction, and I'll think, oh, you know, I'll write like 2 pages and I think I've written a novel. It's just like, it's immensely, you know, I have 2 pages of prose, and I feel, and people, my fiction writer friends will say, oh, keep going. And I'm like, oh no, I did it. That was the novel, you know, and my impulse is to actually go the reverse. And actually there are way too many words here. Let's like squish it, the smaller and smaller container, and then breathe, you know. And it's kind of just a different way of thinking, that you always, of space, of time, of even how your mind works, I think.
I have nothing to add except perhaps silence. I do a lot of translating, and so most of what I'm doing is listening, and I find that incredibly generative for what I want to do as a writer.
Those are all wonderful, and yeah, stunning. And I feel like the maybe holding silence for that after those answers feels right. I have a question that actually aligns with a question that someone asked in the Q&A. So I feel like that feels like the right place to go. And was just thinking about the power of the question itself. And so often in a Q&A, you know, it's me asking, you know, the moderator asking the questions, but the power of the unanswered question too. And so I'm wondering, what are the questions that you each are considering in your poetry these days, whether it be craft-wise, content-wise, or around the responsibilities of being a poet?
I don't have a good answer to this, but it's a sort of a continuation of what I was just saying. I find it very funny that like I said, I'm trying to move towards nonfiction, larger, or fiction, just longer form. And I've been a prose poet all my life, and it seems like the mind is suddenly, oh no, wait a minute, I want verse on the library. For the first time in my life, my poems are appearing in line breaks and smaller and smaller. So I think that all of a sudden I'm really attracted to poetry, in more formal. And I'm thinking, what is going on? I guess I can't answer that question, but there is a push-pull in me on that right now. And now I can't remember what you asked.
Perfect. Yeah, just like what are the questions coming up for you right now? And that's perfect.
Yeah.
I think when Sandra's touched on this, one of the ones that I'm mulling certainly in this book and as I go forward is, what is evil? What is the nature of evil? And, we live in an environment where every day we're confronted with it, obviously, but somehow in the last 5 years, we've paid maybe closer attention to it. Some of us in the community, at least those of us coming from privileged communities, have had managed to somehow block it out a little bit. And I think those blockers have come down, and certainly on a national level, I think it's something we're all considering, but it's definitely something that I'm thinking about in the work that I'm doing.
Yeah.
I don't know, I don't know if we each need to, all four of us, answer each question each time. I ask that in part because I'm not writing poems right now, but I am thinking a lot about the readings that I do. So if I can move your question slightly in a way that engages one in the Q&A, where do we want readings to take place? Who do we want to get to read to? I am looking forward to getting back to the world of being in rooms with folks. Not to say that this was abnormal and that I want to return to normal. That's not what I want. But I'm struck by, there's been so much emphasis on Zoom as a new time of accessibility. And I noticed that on some levels for those with mobility issues, caregiving responsibilities. But in some ways, these readings are not accessible. They're not ideal. There's still a lot of work to be done in terms of access for people with who need interpreters. Also, Zoom readings presume housing insecurity or housing security and access to steady internet. So I'll be glad when we can get back to a mix of spaces where sometimes the reading can be a physical refuge from other spaces. And that's, I think about that a lot because I am at the phase of the books come out. So I'm less focused on the new poems to write and more about how I can create an equitable array of places in which poems can be heard.
Yeah. I mean, I guess I do have an answer to this question, but it's so kind of personal to myself. But it does have to do with this historical moment in the sense that there's sort of this emphasis on identity in America now, and I never really understood those identity issues. But I did have a position in relationship to them, and especially after Donald Trump got elected, it became clear that, to me, that I was an immigrant. And it's a strange thing to be clear about or not be clear about, but because we've been in, my family's been in the country since Eisenhower was president, but the election of Donald Trump emphasized that for me. And through this COVID period, I've been sitting there saying, well, what does that actually mean? And, what does that mean in my relationship to my writing, especially? And because it's not as if I haven't used immigration as a metaphor, but I always sort of conceived of it as something that was reflected in some way in the spiritual condition of the human being, that the human being is always a migrant in some way, that we're between two states, right? And, you know, everything that we do is a negotiation between those two states, neither of which we belong to in some way, you know? But now I'm sitting there saying, well, what shape should my writing take place in response to this new identity that kind of the changing face of America has imposed upon me? Because who do I identify with? I identify with those people at the border, right? You know, they're like the world clambering to get someplace, to be safe somewhere and stuff like that. And that's like a big dilemma for me. I don't know if I'm going to be able to solve it in any way that's reasonably literary, or that makes sense from a literary point of view or from a narrative point of view, and you know, and that's imaginatively satisfying for me. But it's an interesting issue, and it's kind of been thrown up by the currents of the historical moment. If that's an answer.
Definitely an answer. I want to give anyone else, does anyone want to respond to that? Just give some space, otherwise I can ask another question. Beautiful. And just to reference Sandra, you answered this question, but I'll ask everyone now in case anyone wants to speak on it, that another Q&A was, in what ideal setting do you imagine your audience reading this work post-pandemic? What ideal setting would you like to be reading? Where would you like to be reading this to audiences? So wondering if Nin, Vijay, or Katherine, you have any thoughts on that?
I want to be hanging out with Vijay telling like random knock jokes and riddles, meaning like I miss the days of the hangout afterwards, which I think is you know,
oh, yeah, my God.
It's a gift economy. It's unpaid labor most of the time, and I think part of the trade-off for all of us is the community and the informality of dialogue that comes out of that. So I'll meet up with all y'all.
Right, yeah.
I'm all in Charlottesville or elsewhere.
I definitely agree with that.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I was always terribly anxious at any reading I went to, you know, and the payoff was the dinner afterwards, right? Where you get to hang out with the poets and drink, and, you know, and it's such a release. You know, those are the best dinners. They're great, yeah. I
also really miss seeing the audience. I mean, it's a weird thing to be reading to your face. It's just very weird, you know, and just to have that feeling that you may or may not, that you're sort of connecting with a room and the other poets and the bookseller, you know, usually be a New Dominion or something. That I really miss that.
Yeah.
I'm not entirely against Zoom. I just miss the other side.
Yeah. Now, this is a question of technique that I have for the three of you. Katherine and I read from the screen, but Nin, you and Sandra read from books, right? Now, do you prefer the one to the other? Because, you know, you can put your poems up on the screen and people will see you, right? Even though you won't see them, you'll see the poems. Isn't that what you did, Katherine, or did you memorize your poems?
No, definitely not. No, and I've been doing that for a while. I mean, for me, it works better because I've seen a lot of previously. I've done it the other way too, and I've seen video of myself staring down at the book. So I did put it up on the screen. I generally wear glasses, and that's weird because it reflects on the glasses. But I've also shared my screen, and that has worked in certain circumstances as well, so that people who can't hear the work as well can see it.
I'm sure I'll be embarrassed later by seeing myself not looking at the camera, but I you know, as anybody who's ever watched me read, I think picks up, I'm a person in space, and I tend to enunciate a lot through gesture and through motion and through energy. So for me personally, I'm not projecting this outwards, but for me personally, holding the book helps me kind of move myself into performative energy in my work.
Completely agree.
Interesting.
And I mean, when I sitting in a chair, which is what I'm doing right now, is not at all the same as standing on the floor and being able to use the full, range of my chest and breath and all of that sort of thing.
Yeah.
I do also want to put in a plug for the New Dominion Bookshop, which is where I read the last time I read at the Virginia Festival of the Book. And that's where I would like to be today reading. And then we could all go to lunch on the mall afterwards.
Yeah.
Beautiful, Catherine. Beautiful. And that is a perfect place to finish up. This is such an important conversation, right? About like how we are existing in time and space. I would love to keep talking to each of you about that at some point. For now, it's time to wrap things up. Thank you, Nin, Sandra, Vijay, Catherine, and everyone who tuned in today. Please consider buying these magnificent books from your local bookseller or through links on vabook.org. You can also check out future shelf life events from the Virginia Festival of the Book taking place every Thursday at noon. And you can learn more about that at vabook.org. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye, everyone.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody. Until next time.